is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The United States added fewer than expected jobs in July, but unemployment is still near historic lows. What does it all mean for the global economy?
Our other headlines, former US President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
More record flooding in China as Typhoon Doksuri continues to cause widespread disruption in the northeast.
China is sending its special envoy to attend peace talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at finding a solution to the war in Ukraine.
And shock results, some historic moments and record-breaking viewing figures. The Women's Football World Cup enters the knockout stage.
The United States added fewer jobs than expected in July, showing signs that the labour market is cooling in line with the Federal Reserve's goal.
It's fuelled hopes that the economy can achieve a so-called soft landing of reining in inflation without mass layoffs or going into recession. Well, our correspondent Karina Mitchell is at the New York Stock Exchange. So, Karina, what out of this report will the Federal Reserve be looking at most closely?
Well, happy Friday to you both. It is something that the Fed will look at very closely, and it was a very nuanced report and a bit of a mixed bag. So let's take a look at some of the data points that they'll consider. So 187,000 jobs added in July to non-farm payrolls. The estimate had been for 200,000 jobs to come in. But let's take a quick look at the June report, because those numbers were just revised lower. They did come in at 209,000, but revised down to 185,000. That means we actually saw an acceleration in July, so that will give the Fed something to scratch its head over. Something else that it looks very closely at is wage growth, and that actually accelerated. It was up by 0.4 of a point month over month. Year over year, it's up 4.4%. The estimate was for it to come in at 4.2%. Some slowdown, but it's still quite a relatively high number. The Fed likes to see that number at about half where it is to feel comfortable. Now, throw in unemployment. That came in at 3.5%. It actually ticked lower. It was expected to stay pat at 3.6%. So all of a sudden, there is a lot of food for thought for this Federal Reserve to consider with this information, because it shows that the labor market is still very resilient. Now, remember, it's already hiked 11 times in this cycle. It hasn't ruled out hiking again, but it does want to be very careful not to tip the U.S. into a recession. But as you mentioned earlier, there are more people now that buy into this notion that a soft landing may be possible and avoid a recession. And that is because of data like this that came out today, which shows that there is resilience in the labor force. The consumer is quite resilient as well. And inflation is headed lower. It's at this lowest level in 2 years. Now, more data will certainly be warranted for the Fed to make any kind of decision in the future. Next up comes CPI, and they will look very carefully at that. Jamie and Robin.
So it sounds like a bit of a mixed picture in the labour market then. Mixed results too from big tech over the last quarter. But how have Apple and Amazon been doing?
Yes, absolutely. We've had mixed results, and these are the two last big tech titans to report, Apple and Amazon. And their results couldn't have been more divergent. So Apple just actually lost its $3 trillion crown, and that is because its stock is down about 3% today, based solely on weak outlook and performance in its hardware area, which has had some issues. So take a look at revenue for its hardware. In the quarter, iPhone sales were down by about 2%. Revenue on its Mac was down 7%. iPad revenue was down 20%. So some weakness there, tepid demand. China was a bright spot. We saw some acceleration. Now, its service sector, it's where it really makes its money. That's the big money maker, and that was up 8% year over year, but not enough to keep the stock from sinking lower today. Now, Amazon, on the other hand, had an amazing quarter. It knocked it out of the park. Revenue up 11% and earnings beat. Everyone was looking at its cloud service sector to see how that did. It posted a beat, and on the call they said expect more growth and profits in that area delivered really rosy guidance as well, knocked that out of the park. The stock, last I looked, was up 11%, guys.
Karina, thank you very much for that, and a happy Friday to you too. Our correspondent Karina Mitchell there at the New York Stock Exchange.
Former US President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
He appeared in court at a short hearing, which also saw him accused of promoting false claims that the election was rigged and pressuring state and federal officials to alter the results.
Well, let's talk to the Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther in Washington. Philip, so what does all of this mean for Mr. Trump's presidential race?
Well, incredibly, really, it doesn't have a significant impact on his position in that race. Donald Trump, the former president, is still and has been for months now the overwhelming favorite to get the Republican nomination for 2024 to go up against President Joe Biden in the presidential election. These indictments don't seem to have a major impact on his polling. All the polls over the last few months show Donald Trump way ahead of his challengers. That includes those who were seen as good, realistic challengers to Donald Trump. The likes of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is not really making any headway. And it would even appear that Donald Trump is solidifying his position as the front runner with each one of his court appearances. It was the case in New York already, the first criminal case he's involved in. It was the case with his court appearance in Miami and his indictment there. And presumably it will be the case again here in Washington, D.C. Certainly Donald Trump has been trying to raise funds off his appearance here, making himself look like the victim. He says it again and again. He says that this is political persecution, according to him, from the Biden administration, and election interference, though he doesn't provide any proof thereof.
These aren't Donald Trump's only legal problems, though, are they? Just remind us of the other charges the former president is facing.
Yeah, they're all coming together really at the same time. A huge logistical challenge as well as a legal challenge, of course, for the former president, now wanting to campaign, and he will campaign already this weekend for the presidency, first of all for the Republican nomination. And he will have to do that for, well, the next year and more, essentially. All the while, he will also be trying to defend himself in 3 different criminal cases in 3 different cities. And that could, by the way, already in the next few weeks turn into 4 indictments, 4 criminal cases in which he could be charged. But his campaign will continue, and this one might very well be considered the most serious one. The former president here charged with orchestrating an attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power on the 6th of January 2021. In Miami, he is charged with hoarding highly classified documents. We already have a trial start date. That is going to be in May. And in New York City, he is charged with falsifying business records. All of this in connection with hush money payments he wanted to hide from the public. And that is a trial that will begin in March already. It's going to be a very busy year for the former president, and one during which one would presume his reputation will take a further beating.
Philip, thank you for that. Philip Crowther of the Associated Press in Washington.
Car makers Hyundai and Kia are recalling more than 90,000 vehicles in the United States because of fire risks. They've urged owners to park their cars well away from buildings until they can be repaired. Korean automakers say damaged electrical components could be the cause. The recall covers various models, including the Hyundai Tucson and the Kia Sportage.
The shipping giant Maersk reported a sharp fall in second quarter profit and warned of a steeper decline in demand for containers this year. The company had warned of a correction after an exceptional 2022. Often seen as something of a bellwether for global economic health, Maersk said it expects container volumes to go down by as much as 4%, the result of a global economic slowdown.
Australia has called on China to end remaining trade restrictions after Beijing lifted tariffs on barley imports. It's seen as a sign of thawing relations. China imposed tariffs after Australia called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19, a move which affected billions of dollars of trade. Canberra is now pressing Beijing to remove its crippling duties on Australian wine.
London's most iconic department store has big plans for China. Harrods is set to open a new exclusive members club in Shanghai at the end of this year. In a bid to attract China's ultra-rich consumers, it'll be reserved for just 250 members at a cost of $21,000 a year.
CGTN spoke to the managing director of Harrods, Michael Ward, on how he views the changing trends in the luxury market.
We first started to do business in China, there was the evolution of luxury, and that ability to understand luxury was accelerating faster than any other market that we've seen. So that's the change that you've seen, is the creation of wealth in China, but then the younger generation who've really absorbed it and have really understood it to an extent that the previous generation, they enjoyed it, but not to that same level.
Since China's reopening, did you see an influx of Chinese tourists, a rebound of Chinese tourists and shoppers back in Knightsbridge?
Well, throughout the whole of the pandemic, we continue to have the relationship with China because we have a small number of customers who we have a strong relationship with. So even in 2022, last year, up to January, our financial year's January, nearly 10% of our business was China. And that was because we've maintained that long-term relationship. We're starting to see that come back, and I think in the second half, as flights resume, we'll do a lot more business.
And also in China, China's e-commerce has been developing tremendously over the past decade, and online and also social media consumption has taken up a great part of that. Does Harrods have any plan to harness on that trend?
We've harnessed that trend, and we've launched even Harrods CN. But the .com in luxury is still not a significant part of the business. It's the feel and touch of that customer of the product. And that feeling you can't ever replicate online. It's that tangible feeling of just, it complements. It's like the residence. It's the way of communicating and selling when that person is not in country.
What do you think will be the biggest trends in luxury consumption globally?
The trends are really very clear. The middle market is suffering quite badly. People are saving, they want that aspirational piece. And the big brands are being very clever in connecting up both Gen Z and that older population. So there's still a lot of old wrinklies around with a lot of money, but there's a lot of Gen Z, and the brands are brilliant at actually having associations which cross across the whole of that spectrum. So the big power brands are the ones that are really benefiting. The middle ground is difficult, particularly because of the last 3 years where creativity was a bit stifled, that ability to connect in different ways. So where we used to go and collect interesting American brands, we haven't seen anything now for 2 years.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Niger's coup leaders say no to a deal to restore order as they cut military ties with France. So what happens next?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum has claimed he's being held hostage by the military junta who have taken power.
Writing in the Washington Post, he's warned that the entire Sahel region of Africa could fall to Russian influence if the coup leaders are successful. He's urged the international community to help restore order and avoid what he called devastating consequences. But the first attempt at bringing stability to Niger appears not to have worked. The West African delegation has now left the country after failing to secure a return to power for the country's elected government, with the weekend deadline looming large. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Deji Badmus, who's in Lagos and neighbouring Nigeria. So, Deji, these initial talks seem to have failed.
Absolutely, but then it's not the end of the road. But obviously the military leader now in Niger is digging in and is sounding very defiant, has issued a statement saying if there was any military intervention at all, or if there was any attack on the country, that the country would retaliate by targeting the country closest to it, and that, of course, would be Nigeria. The authorities there have lifted the curfew that they placed on the country now since July 26, when this coup happened. And, of course, just as you've reported, you know, they're cutting off ties with some countries. Basically, they've terminated the mandates of the country's ambassadors to the United States, Nigeria, Togo, and France. And now let's talk about that defense chiefs meeting now that is taking place in Abuja. That meeting, as you know, is for the defense chiefs now to strategize on the so-called military intervention now. And that meeting is about rounding off. In fact, at this very moment, speeches have been made. The commissioner, the ECOWAS commissioner for peace and security, has just said, well, that Niger would not know if there was going to be any military intervention at all or strike. Niger would not know, and it wouldn't be notified when that will happen. But then he made it very clear that ECOWAS' sole purpose is to pursue peace and to resolve this by a peaceful means. That what ECOWAS will only resort to military means now, as when other initiatives have been exhausted. So clearly, ECOWAS is still exploring that diplomatic initiative now, hoping that it would still be able to resolve this. I'm very sure that that mission, that delegation now that came back from Niamey yesterday, would still be sent back. So they're still talking, but all the same, Nigerian president has actually sent he sent a memo. He's written a letter to the Senate asking it to approve all the decisions that ECOWAS is taking, including a possible military intervention in that country. So we'll wait and see what happens, but obviously ECOWAS is still very hopeful that it can resolve this by diplomatic means.
Deji, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Deji Badmus in Lagos.
Well, the leaders of the coup in Niger have moved to end a number of military cooperation agreements with France, but Paris has responded by saying only the legitimate government of Niger can carry out such a move.
There's currently around 1,500 French troops in the country, but counter-terrorism operations have been suspended since the ousting of President Bazoum. Our correspondent, Ross Cullen, reports.
The ruling military in Niger said that, quote, faced with France's nonchalant attitude and reaction to the situation, we have decided to denounce the cooperation agreements in the field of security and defence with this state. The move could well lead to France withdrawing its forces from another West African country. France pulled its forces out of Mali and Burkina Faso after military coups in both countries and moved the core of its operations in the southern Sahara to Niger. The soldiers seen here are withdrawing from Mali in August 2022, 1 year ago. French troops are in the region to help disrupt and dismantle armed groups, but the immediate future of the mission in Niger is now uncertain after the Nigerian army rulers revoked a raft of military cooperation agreements. In recent days, since the army deposed the sitting president, there have been major demonstrations in the capital, Niamey. France has been the target of a lot of the protesters' anger, with anti-France slogans being chanted and the country's embassy building attacked. The military junta has also taken the French TV channel France 24 and the radio station RFI off air. It's a decision that the EU and the French government have denounced, saying, quote, "The measures taken against the press are part of a context of authoritarian repression carried out by the authors of the attempted coup." Ross Cullen.
China says it'll be attending the peace talks in Saudi Arabia convened to find a solution to the war in Ukraine.
Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, will meet senior officials from around 40 countries in Jeddah at the weekend. China's foreign ministry says Beijing is willing to work with the international community to achieve a political solution to the crisis.
A Russian warship has reportedly been damaged by Ukrainian drones in the Black Sea.
Moscow says it blocked the drones before they were able to hit their target. But footage on social media shows the ship taking on water as it was towed back to the naval base of Novorossiysk. Ukraine says the vessel, which had 100 crew on board, dropped out of combat missions after the strike. Operators of the local oil terminal say all ship activity at the port was temporarily halted. Russia has not responded.
One of the most vocal critics of Russia's President Putin, the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, has been sentenced to another 19 years in jail. Let's talk to our correspondent Isabel Nakira in Moscow. Isabel, what more do we know?
What we know is that Navalny walked into court today. He looked in a good mood. He was smiling and he looked in good health. He was allowed to interact with his co-accused, who is actually the director of his YouTube channel that was actually shut down, and his lawyers too who were there in that conference room, and they were interacting together before the court hearing. Outside the courtroom, there were a few people gathered in groups who were not actually allowed to access the courtroom, and there was one person holding a placard protesting. Of course, his lawyers protested this kind of arrangement of not allowing people inside the courtroom. A few accredited journalists were allowed in the conference room outside to watch it on video conferencing, and the hearing was a very short one, less than 10 minutes, and it was actually live before, but it was cut off, and the last bit of it was not live on TV. But we do know that, of course, this ruling makes it hard for Navalny to actually again participate in any political gatherings or protests, because he'll be shut out of Russian politics for close to 3 decades, and of course that's what the Russian government intended to have it that way. And of course his supporters, it also makes it hard for his supporters again to go out and protest, because many of them are actually out of Russia, and some of his critics are also facing long jail terms.
Isabel, thank you for that. Our correspondent Isabel Nakira in Moscow.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're in hot water. The world's oceans reach their warmest ever temperature, with experts saying they'll continue to rise.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The United States added fewer than expected jobs in July, showing signs that the labour market is cooling, but unemployment is still near historic lows.
Former US President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
And China is sending its special envoy to attend the peace talks in Saudi Arabia, convened to try to find a solution to the war in Ukraine.
China's Heilongjiang province has been hit by record flooding after torrential rain caused by Typhoon Doksuri.
The flood alert has been raised to its highest level as two major rivers near the capital Harbin overflowed. Wuchang City, one of China's most important areas for rice production, has also been hit by the floods. Thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes.
Rescue operations are still ongoing in the city of Zhuozhou, one of the worst-hit areas. Volunteers are providing crucial support to the emergency services. Our correspondent Chen Mengfei reports.
Damaged rescue boats are carried to a makeshift repair site at the team's base camp. Many have been damaged by debris and other objects carried by the floodwaters. These workers have brought materials from their tent factory and are now helping with the repair work. Requests for assistance keep coming in. They've been working around the clock. Vessels that require more serious repairs are sent to their nearby factory. One rescue team from out of town says they were guided here by a local volunteer. This woman is trying to help by using her phone.
救援队需要什么，我们就去找什么。然后，因为一个人的力量是有限的，发到朋友圈，大家都会转发。
最需要的就是油量哈。
主要就是油，朋友圈有发的我们就打电话，有发的我们就打电话。
People from outside Hebei province have driven through the night to bring food to the rescue workers after seeing the situation in Zhuozhou on social media.
本来就是做救援的，但是我们后勤保障的人不太多嘛，就想着让他们在这救援的同时能吃上一口热饭。
This team of two drove 10 hours from the coastal province of Shandong to bring rescue workers a batch of their specialty pancakes. The Zhuozhou government said on Thursday that it welcomes monetary and material support to help with flood control and relief work. Chen Mengfei, CGTN, Hebei, Zhuozhou.
Well, one group of volunteers working in Zhuozhou is the Jiangsu Blue Sky Rescue Team. The group's leader spoke to CGTN Europe's correspondent Wang Chiwei.
In the past 3 days, we've been trying to rescue people who were stranded in buildings and on small islands using our boat. We worked up to 15 hours per day. The most difficult part is transporting people because they're stranded on small islands surrounded by floods. Transporting them from land by water and heading to the next destination is challenging, as the islands are separated from each other.
What kind of support do the residents of Zhuozhou still need?
We have rescued most people in the worst flood-hit region of the city. However, there are still some people who wish to stay in their homes. Many of the stranded people were in urgent need of food, water and medication, and we will still send these supplies to them.
What kind of people do you have in the team?
Our team is made up of volunteers from around China. They're aged between 35 and 45, and they come from all walks of life.
How did you get into this in the first place?
I've always wanted to help people in need, and by joining the volunteer team, I also learned some useful rescuing skills. I think it's a really good experience for me.
India accounts for more than 40% of global rice exports, but the government has banned non-basmati white rice exports to ease domestic inflation of prices.
And that has raised the prices on the world market, and production is expected to suffer due to a weaker monsoon caused by El Niño. Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer reports now from Delhi.
Thousands of hectares of paddy fields are damaged because of excessive rain in North India. The ready-to-harvest crops were submerged underwater for more than a week. It's a double whammy for farmers like Nagesh Chaprana, who borrowed money to invest on their farms.
We were ready to harvest the crop. It was ready, but the floods damaged all of it, and it ruined us.
Farmers say sowing decreased in June, the main month for the activity.
Floods destroyed our first crop. We cannot grow the second crop as our land has to be tilled, and we don't have the money for that as we're in debt.
Retail prices for rice climbed 3% after the rains damaged the crops. To control prices and to ensure the availability of non-basmati white rice domestically, the government has banned its export.
So we trade around 55 million ton. So 10 million ton is a sizable amount in terms of the global trade level. So it will have significant impact. There is absolute no doubt. If you take 10 million ton out of the market and the demand is still the same, so you expect price to go. And already prices have gone up 15-20%.
Experts say India is likely to receive below average rainfall in August, which could impact rice production.
Uneven distribution of monsoon rain. That's why these inclement weather activities, or you can say the uneven distribution of rainfall, geographical scanty rainfall in some areas and some areas facing flood-like situation. So these contrasting weather patterns are impacting the yield and quality of food grains.
While imposing the export ban, the government has kept the provision of government-to-government sales. This is to ensure that if the rice production is normal this year despite extreme weather events, it will be exported to those countries who need it to meet their food security demands. Ravinder Bauer, CGTN, Dadri.
The world's oceans have hit their hottest ever recorded temperature, and experts warn that that figure is likely to keep rising.
The daily average sea surface temperature reached 20.96 Celsius this week, far higher than it should be at this time of year. Matt Frost is head of international office at Plymouth Marine Laboratory.
Marine life can be affected in two ways. I mean, firstly, there's the direct impact of things that can't move around, and it's just too hot for them to reproduce or too hot for them to function normally, and in extreme cases, too hot for them to survive. And most people are familiar with things like coral bleaching, where it gets too hot and the coral expels some of the algae, and we see that. But it also means a lot of other species are moving around. So those able to, they might move north or south and around in the ocean. But of course, because everything's connected, that then has a knock-on effect. So some small fish or plankton may move somewhere else because it's too hot, but that's actually food for another species. So what you're seeing really is impacts that are happening right across the ecosystem.
The oceans perform a key function in cooling down our planet. Are there short-term ways to try to stabilise their temperature?
You know, I wish the answer to that was yes. You're exactly right. I mean, the ocean absorbs much of the carbon dioxide that it is currently pumped into the atmosphere and performs this great service for the globe. Unfortunately, because of the way this works, there is a lag. You know, there's going to be increasing temperature, air temperature and sea surface temperature will increase probably for years, if not decades to come. So there's no short-term fix. What we can do, however, is two things. Firstly, we can look at adaptation. So how can we start adapting to the reality that we now have, these warmer seas? And I think the second thing is to say, well, we need to start dealing with the source of this problem. We need to deal with it now because, yes, there may be a lag and we're stuck with this for a few years or decades, but there is still time. And if we don't do anything, we can be stuck with it permanently.
You say there's time. In your judgment, how much time would you say we have to act on this before it's too late?
Well, it's difficult to say what's too late because I lead a project. We've been monitoring the impacts in increasing temperature for nearly 20 years. And we've been saying for the last 20 years, it's getting hotter. We've been showing impacts on marine life. And at the time, we didn't really see it as, we knew it was important, but we thought we had some time to deal with it. I would say really now we have to act now. I mean, this is the point. So I don't want to give the impression that we can sit back and say, well, we've got lots of time to come up with ideas. I think we need to act now to stop the increasing temperature and deal with the source of the problem. There's no time for us to sit back and just sort of twiddle our thumbs anymore, I'm afraid.
Earlier this year, England changed the law on gene editing. The government says it allows scientists greater scope to develop crops that are healthier and more resistant to climate change.
Our correspondent Kitty Logan visited a plant research centre in England where scientists are gene editing the grass pea, a vital crop in parts of Africa and Asia.
It's a crop that's survived throughout the ages. The grass pea. Hardy and high in protein. And because of its resilience, scientists are taking a great interest in it today.
Climate change is the main reason why we are working on this crop right now, because the stress conditions under which grass pea survives better than other crops are going to become more frequent and more severe.
But the grass pea also presents a problem.
This is an important crop in some African and Asian countries. It's resistant to certain extremes of climate, but it also contains a toxin. What researchers here hope to do is remove that toxin and make this more widely available in future.
The neurotoxin is found in these seeds. In extreme cases, if malnourished people consume too much of it, it could cause paralysis. Scientists say gene editing can make a crucial change.
We can work out how the enzymes are working, how the proteins are working, and what the steps we would have to do to stop that pathway making the toxin.
And that means the potential to develop varieties with lower levels of toxin or none at all. Last March, England loosened gene editing laws, opening the door for scientists. It's allowed them to grow gene-edited crops outside. A few may be still doubtful, but the government assures the process is safe. And tomatoes like these, enriched with vitamin D, could soon sell commercially.
So we're really excited and happy to see we now have a clear route if we want to take this nutritionally enhanced tomatoes or crops into the market.
Researchers are also investigating how well grass pea grows in European soil and how its climate tolerance could be transferred to other plants. These extended roots seek out moisture in dry conditions, which could benefit future farming.
So it is very possible that a crop like grass pea that is currently not grown in the UK at all will become a mainstay of UK agriculture throughout this century as we just become much more dependent on crops that can withstand a wide variety of extreme weather events.
But breeding the perfect plant takes time, and with climate change accelerating, food production solutions are becoming ever more urgent. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Norfolk.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has widened a car scrappage scheme ahead of the extension of the city's ultra-low emission zone at the end of this month. All Londoners will now be able to apply for a grant worth $2,500 to help scrap vehicles that won't comply with the zone's emissions restrictions. The scheme will be run on a first-come, first-served basis.
Protests have been held in Lebanon as the country marks 3 years since an explosion left more than 200 people dead. Nobody's been charged in connection with the blast at the port in Beirut, which has been blamed on a fire in a warehouse where chemicals were being stored. Families of the victims have repeated calls for the United Nations to begin an independent investigation.
Scientists have found a naturally occurring strain of bacteria that can help stop mosquitoes transmitting malaria to humans. The disease kills more than 600,000 people a year. Researchers made the discovery by accident at a research facility in Spain run by the GSK pharmaceutical company. Trials assessing the safety of the bacteria are now underway.
More than 4,000 UK scouts are set to leave an international event in South Korea, which has been hit by extreme heat. Hundreds have fallen ill at the World Scout Jamboree, attended by more than 40,000 young people. The British group, the largest in attendance, is moving to hotels amid scorching temperatures. South Korea's government is sending water and medics.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The tiny Welsh football club now the subject of global attention because of their Hollywood actor owners.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The Women's World Cup enters the knockout stage on Saturday, where the 16 remaining teams will be whittled down to just 8.
There have already been some shock results, historic moments and record-breaking viewing figures. Well, our correspondent Siobhan McCall is following the story for us. So, Siobhan, an exciting tournament so far. What have been the highlights?
Yeah, Robin, there's been loads of highlights. I think the historic moments with a number of teams, for example, Jamaica, South Africa, they both made it through to the knockout stages for the first time, and there were some really lovely celebrations with all their players. But I think the team that has stolen everyone's heart so far is Morocco. They went into the tournament, it was their first tournament, they're ranked 72nd in the world, so really low down. And they started by losing 6-0 to Germany. So many teams would have just let their heads drop, probably limped out the competition, but no, Morocco got a huge win against Colombia. And actually, that win meant that it was Germany that went home, while Morocco went through to the last 16. And again, it's just been lovely seeing their fans celebrating in Australia and New Zealand, but also back in Morocco. And I think one thing that's really stood out with this tournament is the fact that the gulf between the best teams and the emerging teams is getting a lot smaller. We've seen actually a lot less goals than usual, but that doesn't necessarily make it less exciting. It just shows that that gulf is getting smaller. And we've already lost 3 of the world's top 10 sides. The Olympic champions, Canada, they're gone. Brazil, which is such a kind of footballing side, they're out. And then yesterday, we lost Germany, and that is one of the biggest shocks of all time. And at the final whistle, the German players just didn't know what to do. They were utterly, they just were shell-shocked, and the German media has not held back on that.
How kind of them.
Also, I think viewing figures have been fantastic, and as a real sign, I mean, going into this tournament, Australia and New Zealand, the co-hosts said that they wanted to make it a watershed moment of the women's game. Well, in Australia, their game against Canada became their most watched programme of 2023. And the fact that the Ashes, cricket's so popular in Australia, was on at the same time just shows how much this tournament is doing good.
There were high hopes for China's women, weren't there? But they didn't make it out of their group. I mean, what happened?
No, there was high hopes after they got that win against Haiti, where they had 10 players and they held on. Then they played England, and unfortunately, England did very well. They beat China 6-1, and China went home. That defeat really hurt the Chinese fans, but it really, really hurt the players. The manager came out afterwards, and she just said, it just shows how far we kind of are behind at the moment and how much we have to do. There is a long-term strategy in place in China to get the women's game up to the level that we're seeing in England, in America. And I think the fact that only one Chinese player of the team that went to the World Cup played in those top 2 leagues kind of shows that their domestic league needs to be brought up to that level. So the papers afterwards, once the dust had settled, they were talking about a rebuild, and actually the fans' sentiment kind of is that, yes, it hurt, but actually we're proud. And there's a really nice quote from a Chinese Q&A platform that spoke about the game called Zihu. And they just said, the spirit of the Steel Roses, which is the nickname of the China team, will last forever. And although they're lagging behind, the fact that they've gone to the World Cup, the fact that they've gone to the Olympics makes the majority of fans very proud. And the good news is there's not much time before the rebuild can begin, because the Chinese city of Hangzhou is hosting the 2023 Asian Games. The China women have got 2 matches in that, and then it's on to the Olympic qualifiers. So hopefully qualify for 2024 and maybe even get a medal at the Asian Games.
So returning to this competition, we're now at the business end, aren't we? The knockout stage starts on Saturday. What game should we be looking out for?
It's interesting that the game that potentially could be the biggest upset is the one that no one probably thought it would be before the tournament, and that's the United States against Sweden. So the United States, they're 2-time champions. They've gone into this. Everyone's talking about a 3rd consecutive win for them, but they've just flattered to deceive, and they were actually only Portugal hitting the post away from them going out in the group stage and ending up like the likes of Germany. Sweden, in comparison, they won all 3 matches in the group stage. They are so full of confidence. They really think they are going to win this match. So that's one definitely to look out for. Also, England, the fact that America aren't doing that well now means England have been given the favourites title. They play Nigeria. Many people think this will be a straightforward game for England, and they think that England are, have got the better side of the draw. But you just never know. When the pressure's on, when you're the favourites, things start to crumble. And another game I think we should all look out for is the team that I mentioned before, and that's Morocco. They play France, and that is actually a rematch of the 2022 Men's Qatar World Cup semi-final, where Morocco made it all the way to the semi-finals, really were the pride of Africa. They lost to France, so I'm sure the women will want to get some revenge for that, but also to make their own story.
Siobhan, thanks very much. Our correspondent, Siobhan McCall.
Well, on Saturday, Wrexham Football Club, owned by the Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, makes a return to the English Football League after a 15-year absence. It's not something that would usually make headlines, but the club has become a global phenomenon due to its A-list owners. Wrexham is a city in Wales, near the border with England. It's the world's third oldest football club, founded in the year 1864. In 2021, Ryan Reynolds and McElhenney completed a $2.5 million takeover of the club. Wrexham quickly became one of the fastest-growing brands in football, now reported to be worth over $10 billion. The international hit docuseries Welcome to Wrexham raised the club's global profile, earning it over $5 million and increasing merchandise sales by over 600%. Well, despite being a non-league club, Wrexham signed a 2-year shirt sponsorship deal with TikTok, and their new sponsors are America's United Airlines. And US sporting stars are increasingly investing in English league sides. NFL star Tom Brady has become a minority investor at Birmingham City, while Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps and the golfer Jordan Spieth have stakes in Leeds United.
Let's talk now to Paul Scott, who's an international sports broadcaster. Good to see you, Paul. Welcome back to the programme. So, I mean, this is really worthy already of a Hollywood movie, isn't it? The journey that Wrexham's been on. But is their recent success entirely down to being owned by a couple of rich Americans?
I think Phil Parkinson, the Wrexham manager, would dispute that claim. Obviously, when you've got the profile and the commercial opportunities that Wrexham have, it makes matters on the pitch easier. If you can afford to buy the best players, hire the best coaches, hire the best scouts, then of course it makes life easier. But as we've seen with football in particular, having the most money is no guarantee of success. Look at Paris Saint-Germain, for example. They're owned effectively by the Qatari state. They've been chasing the UEFA Champions League for the best part of a decade, and they've barely come close. They had Kylian Mbappe and Lionel Messi in their ranks, and they still couldn't win the elusive piece of silverware that they were after. Success on the pitch is about getting the right infrastructure behind the scenes. It's about getting a philosophy and an identity and an ideology. And you need a manager that can instill that. And then you need to buy the right players, not necessarily the best players, the right players that can adopt that philosophy from the coach. For example, Wrexham will be playing tomorrow against MK Dons. Their leading scorer last season, Paul Mullin, is out injured. How do you replace the 30 goals he scored last season? You can't just go out and buy someone, because goal scorers like that are hard to come by, and they're under contracts with other clubs. So having the money makes life easier, but it's no guarantee of success. So I think their promotion last season isn't wholly down to the Hollywood money coming in, but it certainly helped.
It's a very interesting tie-up, though, isn't it? Hollywood stars with Wrexham. And they're not the only A-listers who've bought into some other relatively low-profile clubs. What's the attraction, do you think?
Yeah, you mentioned Tom Brady there. We've got J.J. Watt, another former NFL star who's a minority owner now at Burnley. So this is becoming more common, I think. And I think the Wrexham documentary on Netflix is one of the reasons. I think perhaps Ted Lasso plays a part as well, the fictional programme set in English lower league football. I think what that has done is that has opened up the US audience to the fact that lower league football in England exists. It's not all about the Premier League, which of course is such a cash cow. And I think the draw for people like Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney and Tom Brady and J.J. Watt is they are very, very rich people by sort of normal standards, but they haven't got the money to go and buy a Premier League club. You can't go and buy Chelsea or Liverpool or Manchester United with 500 million. You need billions to buy a Premier League club, invest in it and sustain it. But what you can do, because of English football and the pyramid structure where promotion and relegation exists, you can buy a club like Wrexham for a couple of million and hope to get to the Premier League if you get everything in place behind the scenes and you earn those promotions. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. And then you can get a share of the Premier League pie. That sort of opportunity doesn't exist in the US because promotion and relegation doesn't exist. So I think that's one of the reasons that people in America, sporting stars, Hollywood, A-listers who are perhaps looking for a hobby, an investment, are looking at lower league English football clubs.
So what about Wrexham then? They did exceptionally well last season, being promoted back into the Football League. Does this Hollywood investment guarantee them future success, do you think?
No, it certainly doesn't. What they're trying to achieve has been done before. We would use the phrase fairy tale to go from non-league into the Football League, which is the 4th tier, which is where they'll begin playing tomorrow. There's still 3 more promotions before they get to the Premier League. In the English Football League, there's 92 teams. It's extremely competitive, but there are clubs that have done it before. Luton, for example, only 10 years ago were a non-league club, and they are on the eve of their first ever Premier League campaign, having won promotion to the Premier League last season. Bournemouth a few years ago came from the 4th tier, which is where Wrexham will be starting tomorrow, and they're now an established Premier League club. So it has been done before, but both of those clubs did it the right way. They got the philosophies and the infrastructure in place that I was talking about. So if Wrexham can do that, then there's no reason why they can't do it. They've got the spotlight, they've got the attention, they've got the commercial opportunities, but they have to get those factors right behind the scenes.
Paul, good to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. That's Paul Scott, the international sports broadcaster.
Europe.cgtn.com has all of the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take of some of them.
Large herds of Tibetan antelopes cross the Hubei Bridge as they embark on one of the world's most spectacular migrations. The Changchun Air Show attracted a record 650,000 visitors. The event concluded with a spectacular air stunt. Snail-based dishes are winning over a growing number of consumers. One restaurant has launched a dish called sizzling snails with black pepper. An exhibition in the host city of the University Games has been tracing the evolution of Chinese characters, one of the world's oldest writing systems. A rural football super league has been giving villagers a platform to pursue their sporting dreams in front of tens and thousands of fans. And the world's only giant panda triplets have been celebrating their 9th birthday in Guangzhou City. They were treated to birthday cakes made of bamboo and fruits.
All that and more at CGTN.com. The headlines again. The United States added fewer than expected jobs in July, showing signs that the labour market is cooling, but unemployment is still near historic lows.
Former US President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat.
And China is sending its special envoy to attend the peace talks in Saudi Arabia, convened to try to find a solution to the war in Ukraine.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.